Size, filter, overflow. Three fixes, decades apiece. We lock these in so rain works for you, not against you.
Now, let's dive into the number one mistake I see people make when harvesting rainwater, and that's not matching their storage capacity to their catchment area. To begin with, let me clarify what I mean by these terms. So, in rainwater harvesting, your catchment is simply the roof or land area collecting the rain, while your storage is the barrel, tank, cistern, or pond that holds your water. What typically happens is that people install a small barrel or a small tank under a massive roof catchment. And guess what? It fills up insanely fast during even a moderate shower, sending water overflowing everywhere. So people are severely underestimating how much water they can collect. So let me illustrate this by showing you how the numbers might escalate quickly. Let's say you're using a typical 50 to 75 gallon barrel connected to a standard residential roof of 1,700 square feet. In that setup, the barrel will overflow in a single moderate storm. So just a half inch of rainfall on that roof would generate about 530 gallons of water, and that's far exceeding barrel capacity by 10x. So a small barrel would only capture about 14% of available water, with the rest being wasted as overflow. And that's just a single storm in one day. On the other side, I've seen folks invest in enormous tanks that rarely fill because their catchment area is too small or they live in a low rainfall area. Not only is this waste of money and space, but stagnant water also becomes a breeding ground for mosquitoes and algae. For people with ponds, these sizing mistakes can be much more devastating because the scale and investments are bigger. A pond too small for its watershed will dry up during critical growing seasons, while one receiving runoff from too large of an area becomes a flood risk without proper spillways. Fundamentally, proper design isn't about perfection, it's about balance. So your catchment supply needs to work in harmony with your storage demand. Now that we covered the problem, let's see how to get the sizing right. It all starts with understanding what you can harvest and what you actually need. First and foremost, you want to figure out your potential harvest. For this, you need to take your rainfall in inches or millimeters and multiply it by your catchment area. That's your raw collection potential. But not all that water makes it to your tank. Some splashes away depending on the type of surface in question. So you'll multiply by a runoff coefficient to get real world numbers. So to sum up, this simple calculation gives you true water yield, the practical numbers you can count on as your water harvesting potential. Let me illustrate this with a real example. So if you have that 1,700 square feet roof as your catchment area, and your region gets about 24 inches of rainfall annually, and you're using an asphalt shingle roof with a runoff coefficient of 0.8, meaning 80% of the rain that hits your roof will actually flow into your system. When we plug these numbers into our formula, you get approximately 32,640 gallons of rainwater per year. Okay, I suggest you hit subscribe and save this video. You'll want this sizing formula the night before your next storm. Now that we understand how much water you can collect, let's move on to the next important consideration, your water demand. To properly size your water system, you need to estimate your water demand or usage between rain events. For instance, garden irrigation needs or number of people, animals served. For example, an average household of 4 will consume 10 to 12 cubic meters or approximately 2,600 to 3,200 gallons per month for indoor use only. And this becomes your baseline number then. Additionally, you need to consider your local monthly rainfall averages, since you need enough storage to bridge the longest dry period without rain. To illustrate this, let's say you live in a Mediterranean climate and there are 3 months without rain. This then becomes your critical design criteria. You need to bridge that gap with sufficient stored water. So you need to choose a storage volume to meet demand during the dry season. For example, using our calculations from earlier, that would be a 30 cubic meters or 10,000 gallons size water storage to cover the household needs for those 3 months. So in summary, there are 3 key parameters you need to take into consideration: how much water you're able to collect, how much water you need or use, and what is the longest dry period without rain. Based on these 3 factors, and of course being mindful of what's feasible for you economically and space-wise, you can properly size your water storage. Okay, to recap for this step, do the math up front. Don't be afraid. It's not a complex math. It's like multiplying 3 numbers. The benefit is that your appropriately sized catchment and storage pairing will maximize the amount of water you can harvest while minimizing problems such as overflowing too often or drying too soon. Now that we covered proper sizing, let's move on to the next critical mistake. Another critical mistake many beginners make is failing to properly filter the water inflows before they enter storage. You can think of your filter as your first line of defense. Without proper screens or diverters, a lot of unwanted material can flow straight into your water supply. The thing is, rainwater may appear clean, but as it flows over rooftops or ground catchments, it collects various debris and contaminants, leaves, pine needles, pollen, dust, bird droppings, and so on. Without proper filtration, this material accumulates in your tank or pond, causing clogs, sediment buildup, foul odors, and water quality problems. The typical mistake would be a DIY system that simply runs a downspout straight into a tank or barrel, maybe with a coarse screen on top. While this seems like an easy solution, it creates all kinds of problems over time. Organic matter like leaves and pollen contain nutrients that, once in a tank, decompose and feed algae growth. This often turns the water green and smelly. Meanwhile, sediment, dirt, and root grit accumulates as sludge at the bottom of the tank, reducing the water holder capacity and potentially harboring harmful bacteria. Contaminants pose serious risk when the water is used for irrigating food crops or especially for potable use. Bird droppings, for instance, can introduce harmful pathogens. Without proper filtration, your water storage essentially becomes a dirty sump that needs frequent cleaning and often produces foul-smelling, unusable water. Let's now consider the solution. So, your rainwater harvesting system should employ a multi-layer filtration approach. Gutter guards or screens at the catchment point, downspout filters, and typically a first flush diverter that redirects the initial contaminated runoff. The first flush diverter, as I mentioned, is a popular solution. It routes the initial few gallons of rainwater away from the tank. So this is crucial because the first roof runoff typically contains the highest concentration of dirt and contaminants that accumulated between rain vents. Once this initial flush is diverted, much cleaner rainwater flows into your storage. Now, beyond rooftop systems, open ponds and reservoirs also benefit from filtering inflows. For runoff entering a pond, using a small sediment trap or a vegetative filter strip upstream can capture silt and prevent the ponds from rapidly filling with mud. Without these measures, sediment will accumulate, reducing water depth and pond capacity, while also introducing nutrients that inevitably trigger algae blooms. Also, I need to put a special disclaimer here. A filtration system is only effective if it's maintained. Clogged screens or first flush chambers will stop doing their job and can even prevent water entry, causing overflow. That's why regular cleaning is essential. So after every major rain, you can check and clear leaves from gutter screen and empty the first flush diverter chamber. Most experts recommend inspecting and cleaning rainwater system filters at least twice a year. So for example, at the end of the summer and at the end of winter. And of course, after any major storms. To sum up, don't skimp on inflow filtering. Install the necessary screens and diverters to filter out leaf, debris, and contaminants before water enters your tank. This upfront effort will save you headaches down the line, yielding higher quality water for your garden Let's now explore what is perhaps the most damaging mistake, and that's not planning for overflow. In other words, failing to provide a safe, adequate path for excess water when your storage is full. The reality is that every rainwater harvesting system will, at times, receive more water than it can hold. If there is no properly designed overflow route, the water will find its own way out, often with destructive results. More specifically, this issue encompasses two main scenarios. First, an undersized overflow pipe, and then second, overflow that isn't directed to a safe location. To illustrate this point, let's consider a real-world example with the standard 55-gallon rain barrel. This barrel might sit under a 3-inch downspout from 1,700 square feet roof. These types of barrels typically come with a small 1-inch overflow spout, which is standard for manufactured rain barrels like this. As we mentioned earlier, when just half an inch of rain falls onto that roof, it generates approximately 530 gallons of water trying to flow into a 55-gallon barrel. Consequently, the barrel fills in minutes, but here is where the flow planning failure becomes critical. The 3-inch downspout delivers water much faster than the tiny 1-inch overflow can release it. This creates a bottleneck, and water backs up and spills over the barrel's rim instead of through the overflow. As a result, water is pooling around the house foundation, potentially flooding the basement. This is exactly the type of mistake that turns a water harvesting system into a flooding problem. So, as you can see, overflow management is crucial. Fundamentally, when heavy rain hits, a full storage tank without a good overflow will simply cause a flood in new spot. If the inflow is much larger than the outflow, the water will either spill over uncontrollably or due to pressure back up in the downspout. In pond systems, the stakes are even higher. Without a spillway, a pond in a big rain will overtop its dam. And overtopping is the number one cause of earthen dam failures. So fast-moving water can erode the dam crest and blow out the embankment, releasing the pond and causing downstream flooding. Crux of the matter is any storage volume must have a plan for the excess water that will occasionally arrive. To address this issue, always include a generously sized overflow outlet and direct it to a safe discharge area. For rain barrels and tanks, this means installing overflow pipe near the top of the tank. A good rule of thumb is the overflow diameter should be at least as large as the inlet bringing water in. For example, if you have a 3-inch downspout feeding your tank, use a 3-inch overflow pipe rather than a tiny hose. This ensures that when the tank is full, incoming water can exit through the overflow just as fast as it enters, preventing a backup or spill over the tank rim. Additionally, position the overflow outlet such that water is carried away from the foundations and structure, ideally somewhere where it can be used to recharge the soil or support landscaping instead of being dumped onto a driveway or into sewers. For instance, you can pipe the overflow to a mulched rain garden or a swale downhill, where it will soak into the ground and benefit your plants. Now let's consider pond systems. You'll need to have the principal spillway, which is the drop inlet standpipe in the water, which handles routine water level control. It sets the normal full level and passes moderate inflows. And then you'll need the grassy auxiliary spillway, which is at higher elevation and acts as a backup to safely release water when pond inflows exceed what the pipe can carry. Every well-designed pond or large reservoir should have these features. By planning these overflow structures to be large enough to handle maximum anticipated runoff events, you can prevent catastrophic overtopping that leads to dam erosion or collapse when a big rain comes. To sum up, whether for a rain barrel or a pond, the take-home message is the same. Always plan for the overflow outlet and make sure it is as generously sized as practical, at minimum as big as its inflow. And of course, always plan for where excess water will go, because if you don't, nature will find a way, usually with undesirable effects. Okay, so if this type of content resonates with you, I suggest you subscribe. as I'll be sharing more practical content like this in the future.
Okay, in summary, building a rainwater harvesting or water catchment system can save you thousands and make your homestead resilient if you avoid three common pitfalls. So, number one, right size your storage. Number two, filter the dirty runoff. Number three, always plan for overflow. That's it. So, start today by choosing one component you want to fix and grab the one page cheat sheet in the description to help you dial it in. Until next time, bye.